Hey, what's up? It's Joey from Rehab CEO. So we're doing another episode of just answering some of the PT owners' questions that are asking either on comments or inside our school. Of course, we prioritize anybody that's in the school asking questions. So if you haven't already joined the school, make sure you have. It's just school.com. So skool.com/rehab CEOs. And so I'm going to kind of just hop straight in and do this. This is just kind of our live, unedited, just want to answer as many questions as I can versus maybe someone getting answers from someone that doesn't have quite as much context with as many owners kind of around the country, because we're actively working with about 400 people around the nation. So Carlos asked, how important is it to own your own building versus leasing from Bay Area, California, where real estate is expensive? So good question, Carlos. This is a common one, especially as you start getting bigger. You start to realize, hey, we're paying a lot of money in rent, and it's not really going to show up as anything in a couple of years. And so you really kind of just have to figure out first, like, what is the long-term goal? And also kind of you have to look at what your actual lease looks like to start with. Because if we're in short-term leases, so maybe it's only a year, then there is that inherent risk, depending on how things are set up, of how much they can actually continue to bump. That's going to be different even state to state, how much they can actually jump year to year to year. There are a lot of things that happened during COVID where they made that to where they couldn't jump as fast, to where, because a lot of people were doing that to try to force people out as everything started to boom. And so that's one inherent risk you do have to consider, is if it's not controlled, then they can continue to raise those things. So it's kind of a hedge against risk if you were to either lock in a longer lease or maybe consider, can we buy this? I think a lot of people are very surprised when they actually go to talk to these people who have commercial buildings, especially right now. A lot of people are kind of afraid of commercial real estate because just realistically, right now, there's a lot of it still available because we had such a downtrend during COVID, and a lot of those people didn't really know how to backfill that. And so it's quite a different market than even the residential side of things. And so whether I'd say, hey, we need to go in to have a lease versus I want to own it, I think a lot also depends on your goals. So, for example, I've got some people that they have several locations, but maybe they only own one of theirs. I have some that literally do nothing but actually build from scratch. So they own everything A to Z. And then I have some who they've, like, I've got one in Virginia right now. They've got 6 locations and they actually just purchased 3 of them because they were kind of at a point where they wanted to stabilize from a system standpoint, growth standpoint within the locations they did have. And so they had all this excess capital because they're doing right around like $150,000 a month in profit. And so for them, like, doesn't really necessarily make sense for that money to not be doing something. And so if they're not necessarily going to buy or acquire clinics, or they're not opening another de novo at that time, it's either we can put that money into the markets or we can put that into something that we know for sure is going to be around for a while, which is your business if you don't plan on selling it. And so at that time, it starts to make sense. Or also when you start to look at it from a tax liability standpoint. So that's the other considerations, because when we start to buy buildings, we can do accelerated depreciation. We can start to do a lot of different things around that type stuff. So that way, if you're starting to make fat stacks, then of course we want to be able to keep fat stacks instead of just effectively making it. And then unfortunately, we pay it all to the government. So there are some inherent benefits of that. Things where you might not want to actually go ahead and actually buy the business, or sorry, buy the building, is if you think you could better allocate that money somewhere else. And so what that means is, yes, it's nice to have the building, because if you go to sell the practice later, most companies, like pretty much all the private equity companies, don't really want the real estate. They just want the actual business itself, because that's a separate kind of business model. They don't want to really have any worries with that. So then you can sell your practice for a couple $1,000,000 or several $1,000,000, depending on how many locations, how big you are, EBITDA, everything like that. And then now you also have this passive income that you still have passive. There's always some type of active with real estate in general, but you have some type of actual nest egg from the sell, but you're also making money from the actual real estate side of things. And you know you have a good tenant because it was literally you before. So you know the people in there. Healthcare is one of the best tenants you can effectively have. But if you're like, hey, I'm cash flowing this money, should I buy this or should I open more locations? If the goal is to open more locations faster, I don't like the idea of actually being cash constrained because I put it all into an actual building. I would rather dump that into another location, because if we have roughly a 2,400 square foot location, you should be able to fit about 4 therapists in there. So every 4 therapists we have in there, that should be right around $80,000 a month in revenue and $28,000 a month in profit. So you just have to ask yourself, if I was to dump 200 grand, which is usually about what a build out is for a de novo or something like that. Could that be better allocated from a making money standpoint in the building, or does the potential of just having another location actually get us there? So if you're like, hey, I just want to stay one location, then probably actually looking at the route of owning the real estate could make sense. But it's kind of the same things when you're looking at investing and stuff like that. I could just pretty much put money into index funds and probably average about 8%. I literally go through that process and I can pretty much just not check it and know historically it's probably going to go there. And there's very little actual like attention that's being pulled for me. So sometimes we need to also look at what is not the return on investment, but the return on attention. And so real estate, when all numbers are actually included with taxes and compounding, all that type stuff, if you continue to grow it with more and more real estate, typically makes you more money. But it also takes away some of the other aspects of attention and focus and all the other things. And so there's going to be more work that is put into the actual real estate side of things. So most of the time when you're buying one of these buildings that you're in, you also have other tenants. So that starts to become an issue, and that's other things that you have to worry about. And so I typically am not a big fan of going straight into the real estate side of things. But again, there are conditions where it makes sense. There are times where people are wanting to sell it. The terms in which you can do it are good. Right now is not amazing terms from an interest rate standpoint. So it's not ones where I'd really be like, hey, let's go ahead and go do that. Again, I'd rather just open up another location that's going to be able to cash flow more money, because really, depending on where you are in your business, your biggest actual potential from an investment standpoint is really your actual earning potential. And your earning potential is going to grow much faster by opening another location, filling it with 4 providers, than any real money that you could effectively make with just like one commercial building. And so that's kind of how I see it. So that's kind of your answer on that one, Carlos. Hopefully that helps. But again, I'd probably lease before I'd own the building. But again, if you're like, hey, we're kind of landlocked, we don't have any more room to grow, and we don't necessarily want to open other locations, that's when it could start to make sense. But you have to look at it as, well, if I'm not going to open another location and I have money, will that real estate make me more than even just an 8 to 10% if I just put that straight into the market with the most boring aspects of actual investing, which would be like index funds or something like that. And so if it's not, and it's not a big chunk more, then it's probably not worth your actual kind of focus and distraction from everything else, or even just a lifestyle stand of things, because like index funds aren't calling you when stuff is not going wrong, but tenants can. And I say this as like, my dad builds homes for a living. They have a ton of residential properties. My brother does a ton of stuff with one of the biggest commercial real estate firms in the entire nation. So I know quite a bit about the commercial and real estate side of all the bad, for sure. So like, it is not all sunshine and rainbows. There's lots of after hours calls. It doesn't matter if you have a management company, you're going to get pulled into it. So it's not as glorious as they say on TikTok, unfortunately. It's not just mailbox money, for lack of better terms. So that's kind of how we look at things. Hopefully this helps. And again, if you'll have any other questions, feel free to drop the comment school below, and then I'll send you the link to the school community, because like I said, we pull from that community first for any of these questions. And then from there, if we have any comments on any of these, like you're watching right now, we'll also answer those. But my goal is to do at least one of these a day. It may be at different times. Like today, Elliot was sick. So I was just like, okay, we're just gonna have to get everybody down. We're gonna do this. But my goal is just to give y'all as much fast feedback as ever, because otherwise I spend so much time, editing team has to do stuff. It takes forever. And I'd rather just do one of these a day, help y'all as fast as we possibly can. And of course, if there's ever a point where you're like, hey, I'd love to be able to have some more support from y'all, then maybe we've helped you enough to where you realize that we're not a crazy scammer or just a random bald dude that doesn't know what he's talking about. But if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them below and we'll help y'all out. All right. Bye, guys.